Father's Heart, Jarmo Palomaki. Chapter 1. The news had fallen like a lead bullet into the Bennets' already precarious peace. Mrs. Forster, ever gracious, had extended the invitation to Brighton once more, and Lydia, bright and boisterous, had taken it as her due. Her trunks were half-packed, her mind alight with uniforms and balls, when Mr. Bennet, surprisingly firm, had declared it out of the question. "No, Lydia," he had stated, his gaze uncharacteristically steady upon his youngest, most volatile daughter. "You will not be going to Brighton." Lydia, who had been humming a marching tune, stopped dead. "Papa, what do you mean?" "Mrs. Forster specifically asked for me. Kitty will be desolate." "Mrs. Forster is a kind woman," Mr. Bennet replied, his voice devoid of its usual ironic lilt. "But Brighton is no place for a young lady of your sensibilities, unsupervised. Elizabeth has given me good counsel on this matter, and I find to my vexation that I must agree with her." A gasp tore from Mrs. Bennet. "Elizabeth, what nonsense are you putting into your father's head?" "Lydia, my poor child, such a delightful opportunity, and her own sister ruins it." Elizabeth, who had been quietly engrossed in a book, looked up, her expression a mix of regret and resolve. She had spoken to her father, vividly recalling the shame and terror of the information he had heard about Mr. Wickham. But her father had heeded her. The memory of Mr. Wickham, the near elopement with Miss Darcy, the increasing debts it had been a scar upon his soul, a sharp reminder of his own neglected duty. He would not, could not allow history to repeat itself, not with Lydia. "Papa, this is monstrous!" Lydia shrieked, her face a furious crimson. Her eyes, usually sparkling with mischief, now blazed with genuine indignation. "Brighton! It is the only thing I have to look forward to. You condemn me to Meryton, to endless dreary callers, and no prospect of amusement. You deny me my only chance at happiness." "Happiness, Lydia," Mr. Bennet said, a flicker of his old sarcasm returning, "is not found amongst regiments of officers whose intentions are seldom honorable. Your happiness for now must lie in the safety of your home." Lydia stamped her foot. "Safety? You mean boredom? You mean to lock me away just because of some old scandal that was not even my fault? I hate you all. You are all so dull and cruel." And with a final choked sob, Lydia Bennet, fierce and unrestrained, turned on her heel. She fled the parlor, a whirlwind of muslin and indignation, her footsteps echoing on the stairs before her bedroom door slammed shut with a reverberating bang that shook the very foundations of Longbourn. Mrs. Bennet immediately dissolved into hysterics. Kitty wailed in sympathy. Jane hastened to comfort her mother. Elizabeth stood, a knot of unease tightening in her stomach. She had wanted to protect Lydia, but had she, in doing so, pushed her to something worse? The slam of the door, however, was not the end of Lydia's defiance. It was only the beginning. All night an uneasy quiet hung over Longbourn. No further sounds emanated from Lydia's room. The next morning the sun rose, painting the familiar English countryside in gentle golds and greens. But at Longbourn the peace was shattered anew. It began with Mrs. Bennet's shrill, panicked shriek echoing from the upstairs corridor. "Lydia! My Lydia! She's gone! Oh, Mr. Bennet, she is gone!" Mr. Bennet, still in his dressing gown, rushed out. Elizabeth and Jane, already dressed, followed, their hearts pounding. Lydia's room was in disarray. The half-packed trunk lay open, its contents strewn. A window stood ajar, curtains fluttering in the morning breeze. But Lydia was nowhere to be found. On her dressing table, weighed down by a small porcelain figurine, lay a hastily folded sheet of paper. Elizabeth snatched it up, her hands trembling, as she read the familiar, looping script of her sister. "To the family who would rather cage me than allow me to live. I cannot be in such a family. You wish to control me, to deny me all joy, to force me into a life I despise. Brighton was my only hope, and you have stolen it from me. I will not be stifled by your fears and your judgments. I would rather find my way in the world alone than endure another moment of your oppressive protection. Do not seek me. I do not wish to be found. Lydia L. Bennet." The letter was short, dramatic, and utterly devastating. Mr. Bennet took it from Elizabeth's unresisting fingers, his face paling as he read his daughter's furious pronouncement. He had tried for once to be a responsible father, and in doing so, he had driven his youngest child into the unknown, a world far more dangerous than any Brighton encampment. The quiet of the morning was now filled with Mrs. Bennet's keening, Mr. Bennet's silent, profound shock, and the chilling realization that Lydia, impulsive and unprepared, was truly gone, plunging them all into a far deeper, more desperate crisis than any elopement had ever threatened. Chapter 2. When initial shock dissolved, Mr. Bennet, for perhaps the first time in his life, did not retreat to his library. A cold, hard knot of responsibility twisted in his gut. He had indulged her, mocked her, but never truly guided her. This was his reckoning. He began in Meryton, questioning stable boys and innkeepers, his usual dry wit replaced by a grim earnestness that startled everyone. No one had seen Lydia Bennet, not her bright silks, her boisterous laugh, or her telltale ribbons. He widened his net, heading for the coaching inns just beyond the village, the most likely artery of escape. "A young lady, sir, perhaps 17, rather pretty, dark hair, excessively lively," he would begin, his voice growing hoarse. The stable masters, the postilion drivers, the burly porters, they all shook their heads. "Saw a dark-cloaked lass, quiet as a mouse. Took the morning coach to London," one offered, shrugging. "But she weren't no fine lady, sir. Looked, well, common almost." Another recalled a figure in drab travel clothes, face obscured by a deep bonnet, booking passage to the coast. "Paid in coin, not a lick of luggage neither." Each hint, no matter how vague, sent Mr. Bennet careening down another road. He hired post-chaises, disregarding the expense, pushing the drivers through the gloom of night, in the dust of day. He followed a rumor of a young woman seen sketching near a village green, only to find an elderly artist. He pursued a description of a dark-haired girl with a swift stride, only to discover a farmer's daughter returning from market. What he didn't know, what no one could have guessed, was the extent of Lydia's cunning. Driven by a desire for absolute freedom, or perhaps simply by a young girl's dramatic flair, Lydia had shed her identity as completely as a snake sheds its skin. She had exchanged her bright gowns for a coarse, unassuming dress of dark wool, shed her ribbons for a plain linen cap pulled low, and even, it was whispered later by a Meryton laundress who found the discarded finery, rubbed soot from a fireplace into her face to dull her complexion before leaving. She was not a young lady of quality running away. She was an anonymous cipher, a shadow among shadows. The search wore on. Days bled into weeks. Mr. Bennet crisscrossed the country, from the bustling inns of London to the quiet market towns of Kent, his face growing gaunt, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. He interviewed landlords, sent letters to distant relatives, posted notices in towns, offering rewards that went unclaimed. His mind, usually sharp and quick, became a dull instrument, focused solely on the next lead, the next mile. He ate little, slept less, driven by a gnawing guilt that grew with every unanswered question. He saw countless dark cloaks and bonnets, heard countless whispers of nameless women traveling alone. But not one of them was Lydia. His vivid descriptions of her vivaciousness, her striking appearance, were met with blank stares. The girl they remembered was unremarkable, forgettable, a ghost even before she truly vanished. The financial strain was remarkable, the emotional one much greater. His wit had deserted him entirely, replaced by a hollow despair. He imagined her cold, hungry, alone, or worse. The fear clawed at him, a constant, ugly companion. He had failed her in life, and now it seemed he was failing her in absence. The rain lashed down, a cold, relentless curtain that blurred the already unfamiliar landscape. Mr. Bennet, hunched against the elements, urged his hired horse onward. The road was a ribbon of mud, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and desperation. For a man who cherished the dry, quiet sanctuary of his library above all else, This arduous journey was an act of profound self-abnegation, driven by a terror colder than the harshest English winter. Lydia was gone, run away alone into the vast, indifferent world. His mind, usually so sharp with cynical observation, was now a chaotic whirl of fear and self-reproach. He thought of the parable, recalled from some forgotten sermon, or perhaps from one of his wife's more fervent and often misapplied readings. Luke 15:4. What man of you, having 100 sheep, if he lose one of them, doth not leave the 99 in the wilderness, and go after that which is lost until he find it? The words echoed in the desolate emptiness of his heart. He, Mr. Bennet, had left his family, his wife, his 4 other daughters, all safe within the familiar, if often vexing confines of Longbourn, to search for his lost one. His 99 were secure, fretting perhaps, but unharmed. It was Lydia, his foolish, flighty Lydia, who was out there, vulnerable, perhaps terrified, perhaps already beyond saving. A wave of nausea swept over him. He had always prided himself on his detachment, his amused observation of the folly around him. He had often retreated, not just physically to his library, but emotionally, from the boisterous chaos of his household. He had allowed Mrs. Bennet's shrill anxieties and Lydia's unfettered silliness to wash over him, believing he was merely preserving his peace. He had left them, in a sense, long before Lydia physically fled. But now, with Lydia truly lost, a terrible truth had dawned upon him. The dull ache that had settled in his chest, the constant knot of anxiety in his stomach, the sleepless nights spent replaying every careless word he'd ever directed at her. This was love. A love he had taken for granted, dismissed as an inconvenient parental duty, or masked behind a facade of ironic wit. He imagined the shepherd from the parable, the relentless pursuit, the single-minded focus on the one lamb that had strayed. He was that shepherd now, muddied and weary, his heart a raw, open wound. And if he, an imperfect, often negligent man, felt this overwhelming pull, this desperate yearning for his lost child, how much more profound, how infinitely more boundless, must be the longing of the Almighty for a single soul strayed from his fold. The thought was humbling, shattering. If he, with all his faults, his prior indifference, his intellectual distance, felt this agonizing ache for Lydia, then the love of Jesus, the Good Shepherd, for his lost children must be a force that defied all human comprehension. It was a love that embraced, sought, and yearned with an intensity that dwarfed his own newfound desperate affection. And only now, with the chilling prospect of her permanent absence, did he truly grasp her importance. Her silliness, which had once grated on his nerves, now felt like a precious, irreplaceable part of the vibrant tapestry of his life. Her youthful exuberance, her unthinking joy, her very presence had, unknowingly, anchored him, given him a purpose he had disdained to acknowledge. She was not merely a daughter. She was a piece of his soul he hadn't known was missing until it had threatened to be torn away forever. The rain continued to fall, mingling with the unshed tears in his eyes. He pressed on. The image of the searching shepherd burned into his mind. He would find her. He had to. Not just for her sake, but for his own, for the redemption of a father who had foolishly believed he could live without acknowledging the depths of his own heart. The journey was long, and the outcome uncertain. But one thing was now terrifyingly clear. He loved his lost daughter, Lydia, with a fierce, desperate intensity he had only now, in the face of her potential loss, discovered within himself. And if he, a mere man, could feel such a love, then the Good Shepherd's promise was indeed a comfort beyond all earthly understanding. One bleak afternoon, standing on a windswept crossroads where a coach had supposedly dropped off a plain-dressed passenger weeks prior, Mr. Bennet looked at the empty horizon. He had questioned every person, followed every rumor, exhausted every avenue. There was nothing left. He was a man shipwrecked on dry land, staring at a sea that offered no rescue. A profound, bone-deep weariness settled upon him. He had done everything a man could do. He had abandoned his studies, his comfort, his dignity. He had walked among strangers, pleaded with the indifferent, and endured the pity of the kind. But Lydia, in her desire to be utterly untraceable, had succeeded beyond all measure. She had become an unknown person, and in doing so had become irrevocably lost. With a heavy, defeated sigh that seemed to drain the last vestiges of strength from his body, Mr. Bennet turned his back on the empty road. He would go home to Longbourn, to his weeping wife and frightened daughters, and confess his failure. He had given up. And in that moment, something precious in Mr. Bennet, something that had always held on to a sliver of hope, even through his cynicism, quietly died. Chapter 3. The lamp in Mr. Bennet's library burned low, casting long, nervous shadows across the spines of forgotten volumes. Outside, the night air of Hertfordshire was still and heavy, a profound silence that usually brought him comfort, but which now felt like a vast, cold echo of Longbourn's emptiness. He had often retreated here to escape the noise and folly of his family. Now the silence was the consequence of the worst noise possible, the abrupt, shocking void left by Lydia's departure. He leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking beneath his weight, and closed his eyes. The memory of the confrontation was sharp and painful. He had finally, belatedly asserted his authority, urged on by the devastatingly clear-sighted arguments of Elizabeth. "It is not right," Elizabeth had said, her voice unusually strict, "to expose a temperament so utterly unguarded to the temptations of a military camp." And he had listened. He had finally heeded the fear of consequence. He had forbidden the trip to Brighton, convinced he was performing the overdue duty of a responsible parent, saving his youngest and arguably most foolish daughter from certain, if slow, social ruin. He had agreed with Elizabeth that in such circumstances, the free mingling, the inevitable flirtation, the public display of her imprudence, Lydia would surely have ruined the whole family's prospects through mere censure and association. But now, he opened his eyes, staring sightlessly at the dark window pane. Now she had done worse. She had not merely flirted indiscreetly under the public eye. She had run away, hidden her path, thrown herself entirely upon the doubtful mercy of a man whose character was, at best, utterly unknown, and at worst, predatory. The ruin was no longer slow and public. It was sudden, decisive, and absolute. It was the complete obliteration of her name and the irreparable staining of her sisters. Had it been correct to forbid her to travel to Brighton? The question was a torment. If she had gone to Brighton, she would have been under surveillance, however lax. She would have been surrounded by others, her indiscretions contained, likely resulting in nothing more than a few broken hearts and a return to Longbourn with a vast stock of ridiculous stories. She might have made a foolish marriage, but at least it would have been a marriage. By forbidding the journey, he had merely denied her the opportunity for legal folly, pushing her youthful recklessness into a far darker, clandestine channel. She had escaped the bounds of familial control completely, believing herself to be executing an adventure, not committing an act of total self-destruction. His stomach clenched with a bitter truth. His tardy exercise of authority had not saved her. It had merely redirected her headlong rush toward disaster. His great sin was not this prohibition, but the years of allowing his wife's silliness and Lydia's unchecked vivacity to blind him to the impending danger. He had indulged his own humor while the framework of his family's peace crumbled around him. His heart ached with a weight far heavier than shame or embarrassment. It was the cold, hollow dread of a father who suddenly realizes he may never see his child again. Or worse, see her returned only as a ghost of her former self, destitute and socially dead. Lydia was still his daughter, the loud, giddy, brightly colored creature who had filled his silent house with unnecessary excitement, the one whose very lack of intellectual depth had often amused him. He remembered her face when she begged to go, utterly guileless, vibrating with the immediate desire for pleasure. It was this heedless innocence that now made her peril so terrifying. He had relied always on satire and intellect to navigate life. Now facing this abyss, those tools were useless. Reason could not retrieve her. Wit could not save her reputation. Philosophy could not guarantee her safety. All that remained was the humbling surrender to forces beyond his control. Mr. Bennet lowered his head into his hands, the rough texture of his skin a stark contrast to the silky, delicate feeling of despair that now consumed him. A man of irony, a man who rarely spoke a word that was not laced with skepticism. He found himself utterly stripped of cynicism. He could now only pray. To the God whom he rarely troubled with his requests, he offered up the desperate plea of a failing father. He prayed that he would protect her physical safety in her heedless journey. He prayed that the Lord would put some barrier between her and wickedness, and that he would, through some miracle of divine intervention, change her mind to return her, intact and alive, to home. It was a prayer not for reputation, nor for society, but a raw, aching supplication for the return of his youngest daughter before the world utterly destroyed her. He prayed, and for the first time in his life, Mr. Bennet understood that the greatest folly was not Lydia's imprudence, but his own profound neglect. Chapter 4. The smell of wood smoke and stale ale was Lydia's new perfume. The clatter of plates and the boisterous laughter of drovers and merchants were her new drawing-room music. 6 weeks had passed since she slipped out of her family's estate under the cover of a moonless night, a small satchel clutched tight, and a heart thrumming with a terrified, exhilarating freedom. She'd initially set her sights on Brighton, imagining the sea air would somehow wash away the suffocating dust of her old life. But a chance encounter with a kind-faced wagoner had imparted a crucial piece of wisdom. Brighton, a fashionable resort, would be the first place her father's extensive network of contacts would scour. Too public, too easy to trace. So when the weary wagoner dropped her off at the Sleeping Fox, a sturdy, if unremarkable, inn nestled halfway between London and her intended escape, Lydia had found herself at a crossroads. The innkeeper had offered her a room in the eaves and a living wage in exchange for her strong back and nimble fingers. Lydia, accustomed only to needlework and garden strolls, had accepted with a gratitude so profound it bordered on desperation. Each day was a blur of scrubbing floors, hauling water, serving coarse food and cheaper ale. Her delicate hands, once pristine, were now calloused and chapped. Her feet ached constantly, yet beneath the grime and fatigue, an ember of fierce pride glowed. This was her life, chosen by her, sustained by her own effort. She remembered the tight-laced corsets, the endless etiquette lessons, the whispered expectations of a suitable marriage that would further her father's business ambitions. She remembered the suffocating silence of dinners where her opinions were met with a dismissive wave, the relentless pressure to be a decorative, compliant daughter. Most vividly, she remembered the last argument, her father's face contorted in a mask of benevolent tyranny, declaring, "You will do as I say, Lydia. It is for your own good. You understand nothing of the world." Oh, but she did understand. She understood she was a possession, a bargaining chip in a game she refused to play. The memory still curdled her stomach, sharp and acrid. It was during her weekly errand to the nearby market town for supplies that she saw them. Nailed crudely to the post office door, taped to a baker's window, even tucked beneath a loose stone on the church wall. "Missing!" they blared in clumsy block letters. Below, a surprisingly accurate description of her, though softened by a father's selective memory. And then the words that twisted her gut. "Lydia, my dearest daughter, return home. All is forgiven. Your loving father begs for your safety and presence." She stared, a strange mix of emotions swirling. Relief that he hadn't found her. A surge of old, familiar anger. "All is forgiven?" She scoffed under her breath, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. He is the one who needs forgiving. His pleas, designed to tug at a daughter's heart, only solidified her resolve. They were another manipulation, another attempt to reassert his control, cloaked in concern. He didn't want her safe. He wanted her subdued. She couldn't return. The thought sent a shiver of dread colder than any winter wind. She still hated the way he had tried to mold her, to break her spirit. She still wanted to decide over her life herself, to carve her own path, Even if that path was rough and strewn with hardship. She still could not submit to the gilded cage, the suffocating trammels at home. Back at the Sleeping Fox, she threw herself into her work with renewed vigor. Serving a particularly loud coachman, scrubbing a stubborn stain from a wooden table, she found a strange kind of peace in the sheer physicality of it all. Here, her value wasn't in her family name or her prospects. It was in her efficiency, her quick smile, her ability to carry a tray laden with tankards. As the sun set, painting the sky in furry hues over the distant, winding road, Lydia stood by the back door, inhaling the crisp evening air. Her body ached, but her mind felt clear. She was alone, yes, but she was also free. The road stretched out before her, both ways leading to an unknown future. Home was a place she would not go back to. Not yet, perhaps not ever. The world was vast and daunting, but it was hers to navigate, one weary, independent step at a time. Chapter 5. The chill of late autumn was a familiar companion at the Sleeping Fox, but never before had it seeped into Lydia's bones with such a gnawing insistence. For 3 months she had been a fixture here, a quiet shadow moving through the inn's routines, scrubbing floors until they gleamed, polishing tankards until they reflected candlelight, ensuring beds were fresh and fires stoked. Her room, small and sparsely furnished in the attic eaves, was a sanctuary, often cold, but always her own, with the promise of a small fire on the bitterest nights and a precious stub of candle to read by. Her meals, simple but hearty, were eaten in the kitchen, a welcome reprieve from the endless toil. This evening, however, Master Alara the innkeeper had summoned her to his office. His usual booming laugh was absent, replaced by a grave set to his jowls. The flickering lamp on his desk cast long, dancing shadows that seemed to swallow the room's usual warmth. "Lydia," he began, his voice surprisingly soft, "I have ill tidings. This autumn, it's been the quietest in memory. The roads are barren, the travelers few. The coffers, Lydia, are emptier than a beggar's purse after market day." Lydia's heart began to thud, a slow, heavy drumbeat against her ribs. She braced herself. "I can no longer afford any cost due to you," he continued, eyes refusing to meet hers. "It pains me to say it, but it would be best if you found new work for yourself somewhere else. The season is only going to worsen, and I cannot carry you." A cold dread, more profound than any autumn chill, washed over her. New work? Where? The country roads were desolate, the towns far, and she had no family, no connections, no savings. The image of wandering the frost-nipped paths exposed to the elements was a terror she couldn't face. "Or," Master Alara said, sensing her panic, "if you wish to stay, the conditions, they must change, drastically." Lydia swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. "How so, Master Alara?" His gaze finally lifted, meeting hers with a mix of pity and resignation. "There will be no warming fire in your room. Wood is a luxury I can no longer spare. No candles either. Light is for paying guests, not for those who cannot pay their way. And food? No more of the kitchen's fare. You may have what the customers leave over. Scraps, mind you, but it's sustenance." Lydia felt a pang of humiliation, hot and sharp, to eat the leavings like a dog. "And your duties, Lydia," he pressed on, his voice hardening slightly. "They will remain the same. The rooms must still be cleaned, the privies scrubbed, the waste taken out, all of it. You will work as you always have, but under these new terms. It is either this or the road. I offer you this out of what little good faith remains between us." The silence in the room stretched, thick and suffocating. Lydia's mind raced, desperate for an alternative, a hidden escape route, a forgotten coin. But there was nothing. The road was a death sentence. The inn, even under these brutal new terms, offered a roof however cold and food however meager. It was a choice between a slow, steady demise by starvation and exposure, or a slow, steady grinding down of her spirit and dignity. Her voice, when it came, was barely a whisper. I understand, Master Alara. I will agree to the conditions. A flicker of relief crossed his face, quickly masked. Good. Then it is settled. He gestured dismissively. You may go. Lydia turned and walked out, the inn's heavy oak door closing behind her with a definitive thud that echoed the finality of her decision. She returned to her small room, the weight of the new reality pressing down on her. The air in the attic was already colder than usual, a damp, creeping chill that promised to be much worse without the comfort of a fire. The empty hearth gaped like a hungry mouth. She fumbled for the small ceramic plate where she usually kept her candle stub, only to remember. No light. She lay on her straw mattress in the burgeoning darkness, her stomach a hollow ache, listening to the muffled sounds of laughter and warmth drifting up from the common room below, where fires blazed and customers feasted. Tomorrow she would begin her new life, a life stripped bare of even the simplest comforts. A ghost in her own home, surviving on the leavings of strangers, warmed by nothing but the desperate fire of her own will. The winter had truly begun. Chapter 6. The cold was not a simple absence of heat. It was a physical antagonist. It lived within the warped slats of the floorboards in Lydia's attic room, curled like a snake in the threadbare blanket, and clung to the very marrow of her bones. Without a spare farthing for firewood, the stove was a useless iron idol, mocking her with its potential warmth. The resulting chill was the first tutor in her harsh new education. The second was the darkness. When the sun vanished behind the soot-stained skyline of the city, the evenings did not merely grow dim, they plunged into absolute blackness. Lydia could not afford so much as a tallow stub. She relied on the thin, oily glow that seeped up the staircase from the grimy taproom below. This enforced isolation meant hours of unblinking silence, forcing her mind to turn inward, away from the immediate distractions of labor. She lived on the disgusting leavings of the inn's patrons, the scraps of fatty mutton rind, the heels of bread gone green with mold, the watery dregs of soup bowls that the house dog refused. She ate quickly, stomach churning, knowing that the sustenance was barely enough to fuel the next 12 hours of frantic scrubbing and hauling. Her clothes, the sturdy blue traveling dress she had packed with such hopeful defiance 6 months ago, were now decomposing. They were stiff with dried dishwater, ripped at the seams, and smelled perpetually of stale beer and sweat. The fabric wore thin over her elbows, revealing skin that was bruised and chapped, a visible, undeniable measure of her decay. This was the vaunted freedom she had bought at the cost of her family. Lydia had run away thinking she was escaping suffocation. She had chafed under her father's strict schedule, her mother's relentless expectations, and the suffocating rules of polite society. She imagined independence as a sunlit prairie where she could simply be, unbound by duty or obligation. The inn, a vile establishment managed by the silent, grasping Mr. Grimsby, was the harsh antithesis of that dream. Each morning she awoke before dawn, her stomach tight with dread, and worked until her hands were raw and blistered. She hauled buckets of slop, cleaned the unimaginable filth left by drunken travelers, and endured the sharp, cutting insults of the kitchen staff. Her reward for the ceaseless, back-breaking servitude was not wages. It was merely the right to keep her miserable, freezing room for one more night. She was the property of the inn, the cost of her shelter paid daily in the slow erosion of her health and self-respect. Slowly, painfully, the true nature of her situation began to open her eyes. She had sought freedom from labor, but found a slavery far more extreme than any housework she had ever resented. She had wanted to live without rules, yet she was governed by the iron laws of necessity. Work or starve, work or freeze, work or be thrown out onto the street. She realized with a terrifying clarity that the rules she had fled, the expectation to be prompt, to be clean, to contribute to the household, were the very things that had previously secured her warmth, her nourishment, and her safety. There was no freedom without responsibility. The responsibilities she had shirked at home, to uphold her place and perform her gentle duties, was merely the cost of her security. Now her responsibility was simply survival, a burden far heavier and crueler. She had craved self-determination, the right to choose her path, but here her choices were non-existent. Her path was dictated entirely by the demands of the innkeeper. The rules she had despised at home had actually been the framework that allowed for meaningful choice. They protected her from the brutality of true anarchy. Most devastatingly, she had believed that true independence meant being independent of all other people. She had imagined a life where she relied on no one. But in her isolated misery, she realized that she was not independent at all. She was miserably, utterly dependent on the fickle moods of Mr. Alara, dependent on the scraps left by the patrons, dependent on the very system she detested. She recognized the profound interdependence of her former life. She was dependent on her father's protection, but he was dependent on her cooperation. She was dependent on her mother's care, but her mother was dependent on her respect. This dependence was mutual, underpinned by affection and care. The independence she had achieved here was a hollow pedestal of misery. She had traded a benevolent, supportive dependence for a vicious, precarious one. One evening, shivering violently in the pitch-dark room, picking at a piece of bread so hard it threatened to crack her tooth, the dam finally broke. She pictured the glow of the fire in her family's parlor, the scent of her mother's rose water, the sound of her father's predictable, low voice reading the evening paper. It was the first time in these long, brutal months that the memory brought not a surge of righteous anger, but a profound, aching sorrow. A single, hot tear traced a path down her grime-streaked cheek, freezing almost instantly in the cold air. Lydia buried her face in her stiff, threadbare blanket, the smell of grease and rot overwhelming her. She had been foolish, arrogant, and blind. She began slowly, horribly, to regret that she had run away from home. Chapter 7. The worn velvet of the armchair offered little solace to Mr. Bennet. He stood as he had for weeks by the tall library window, his gaze fixed on the winding gravel path that led from the main road to the sturdy gray stone of Longbourn. The late afternoon sun, usually a cheerful sign, merely highlighted the dust motes dancing in the air, each one a tiny, mocking reminder of the emptiness that had settled over the house since Lydia's departure. He wasn't a man given to overt displays of emotion, his usual wit and sharp observations serving as a rather effective shield. But that shield had fractured, leaving his heart exposed and aching. Every horse's hoofbeat that echoed on the distant road, every carriage that rumbled past sent a jolt of frantic hope through him, only to be followed by the crushing weight of disappointment. He had tried. Oh, how he had tried. He had ridden for miles, questioned every traveler, bribed stable hands, and dispatched discreet inquiries through a network of acquaintances. But Lydia had vanished as if spirited away by the very winds that rustled the leaves in the park. His library, once a sanctuary of quiet contemplation and mild amusement, now felt like a prison. The familiar scent of aged paper and leather was tinged with the ghost of her laughter, the echo of their debates, the warmth of her presence. He'd pick up a book, a favorite essay, or a well-worn volume of poetry, but his eyes would inevitably drift back to the window, to the empty path. His thoughts relentlessly circled back to her. He pictured her face, so full of intelligence and a fearless independence that had both delighted and, he now admitted with a pang, terrified him. He saw her determined stride, her bright eyes scanning the world with an insatiable curiosity, and then the image would blur as the painful reality of her absence would set in. Had she found what she was looking for? Was she safe? Was she, by some cruel twist of fate, unhappy? The why of her leaving gnawed at him. He had done his best, hadn't he? Or had he failed in some fundamental way? The thought was a cold dread that settled deep in his belly. He had often indulged her independent spirit, perhaps too much, but he had never imagined it would lead to this chasm between them. He yearned for her return not just for his own sake, but for the sake of the equilibrium of his family, for the silencing of Mrs. Bennet's incessant fretting, and most importantly, for the restoration of the light that Lydia still had brought into his life. He traced the condensation on the window pane with a fingertip, drawing a clumsy, uneven line where her face might have been. It was a foolish, childish gesture, but it was all he could manage in the face of such profound longing. His heart ached with a powerful, consuming love for his absent daughter, a love that had been amplified tenfold by her absence. He would wait, he would watch, he would pray, and in his quiet, often solitary way, Mr. Bennet would continue his vigil, a father lost in the agonizing hope of seeing his beloved Lydia walk up that path again, her silhouette finally breaking the desolate emptiness of the view. The fire crackled merrily in the hearth of the drawing room at Longbourn, casting warm, dancing shadows across the familiar furniture. Outside, the world was a hushed canvas of gray and white, the air sharp with the promise of snow. It was already the middle of December, and preparations for Christmas were in full swing. Garland hung from every archway, holly sprigs adorned the mantelpiece, and the scent of baking mingled with the pine of a small, decorative tree in the hall. But Mr. Bennet, usually immune to such festive cheer, felt its absence keenly this year. He didn't join Mrs. Bennet's frantic orchestrations or his daughter's excited chatter. Instead, he stood by the window, his hands clasped behind his back, his gaze fixed on the winding drive that led to their home. For 6 long months, that drive had offered nothing but disappointment, a silent testament to a wound that refused to heal. He saw the fluttering ribbons on the stable gates, the faint outline of a child's snowman rising uncertainly in the distance, but his mind offered no amusement. He was staring, as he often did, into the void left by his youngest daughter's heedless flight. Lydia, his foolish, headstrong, now utterly lost Lydia. The light was fading, painting the late afternoon in bruised purples and dull grays, when a flicker of movement caught his eye. Something was approaching from the road, a dark, shambling silhouette against the pale snow. It moved with a hesitant, almost broken gait, a figure too small, too hunched to be a delivery man, too slow to be a neighbor's servant. As it drew closer, Mr. Bennet squinted, a peculiar chill snaking through him that had nothing to do with the winter air. The figure was human-formed, certainly, but so swaddled and obscured by what looked like rags that it seemed less a person and more a walking bundle of misery. Head bowed, shoulders slumped, it shuffled rather than walked, each step an effort, leaving a faint trail in the sparse dustings of snow. The clothing, if one could call it that, was a patchwork of torn and soiled fabrics, barely clinging to a skeletal frame. It was a wretch, a vagrant, a creature of the elements, surely lost or driven by some desperate plea for charity. Then, a sudden gust of wind, or perhaps the figure stumbling on an uneven patch of ground, caused the head to lift, ever so slightly for a fleeting moment. A curtain of matted dark hair, once so bright and lively, fell away from a face. Mr. Bennet's breath caught in his throat, a sharp, painful gasp that echoed only in his own chest. His heart, a dependable, if often weary organ, gave a terrifying leap, threatening to climb out of his ribs. The world outside the window, the cheerful decorations, the warm fire behind him, they all dissolved into a swirling mist of disbelief and dread. It was her. The hollowed cheeks, the bruised shadows beneath eyes that had once sparkled with reckless glee, the thin, chapped lips, the very tilt of the head, even in its profound dejection. It was Lydia, his alone runaway daughter, lost for more than half a year, returning not in triumph or even defiant shame, but as a ghost of her former self. A tattered ruin, stumbling back to the home she had so carelessly abandoned. His legs, usually so steady, threatened to buckle. A tremor ran through him, a seismic shock of recognition, pity, and a resurgence of old, familiar anger, now tempered by an overwhelming, agonizing tenderness. She was here, on his drive, a creature of rags and despair, looking exactly as he had always feared she might, but never truly believed she would. He remained frozen, his gaze locked, as the wretched figure of his daughter reached the garden gate, paused, and then, with a profound, almost ritualistic weariness, slowly pushed it open. The sound of the latch clicking, faint but distinct, was the only thing that broke the sudden, terrible silence that had descended upon Mr. Bennet's world. Lydia was home, and nothing, not even Christmas, would ever be the same. Chapter 8. He saw the rags clinging to her, the way her gait was hesitant, almost trudging, a stark contrast to the spirited girl who had flounced away mere months ago. He noted the dirt caked on her stockings, the unkempt tangle of what was once her bright, shining hair, the whispers that had haunted his quiet hours, the shame that had settled like a shroud over his household, the desperate search that had yielded only silence and worry. It all seemed to recede, replaced by an overwhelming, primal surge. His breath hitched. He didn't need to see her face clearly. He didn't need confirmation. It was her. Without a second thought, Mr. Bennet pushed away from the window. He didn't pause to consider the impeccably kept Persian rug beneath his feet, or the faint scent of beeswax and lavender that usually perfumed the air. He didn't register the surprised gasp from Mrs. Bennet, who had been diligently arranging a vase of roses. His mind was a singular focused beam. He burst through the heavy oak door, his coat flapping behind him. The groundskeeper stopped, his rake hovering in midair, as Mr. Bennet strode across the lawn. A man possessed. He ignored the overgrown weeds near the path, the fallen leaves that hadn't yet been swept, the general air of neglect that had begun to creep into the estate during Lydia's absence. His eyes, which had often held a glint of wry amusement or intellectual detachment, were now alight with a desperate, unadulterated joy. He reached her as she stumbled onto the edge of their property, her shoulders slumped, her head bowed low. He didn't care about the pungent, unfamiliar odor that clung to her, the smell of hardship, of desperation, of the road. He didn't see the blemishes or the weariness etched onto her face. He simply closed the distance and gathered her into his arms. The embrace was fierce, almost desperate. He buried his face in her hair, the smell of dirt and travel overwhelming the more familiar sense of home. And then he kissed her. A kiss that spoke of longing, of forgiveness, of the sheer, blinding relief of finding what he had thought lost forever. Lydia, stiff and trembling in his arms, didn't meet his eyes. She couldn't. The weight of her transgressions, the shame of her journey, was too heavy. A choked sob escaped her lips, a sound that was both a confession and a plea. Mr. Bennet held her tighter. He felt the tremor rack her small frame, the silent testament to her suffering. He too began to weep. His tears were not of sorrow, but of a profound, overwhelming joy. Joy at her return, joy at the unraveling of the tangled thread of worry that had plagued him. And Lydia, held fast in his unexpected, unjudging embrace, felt a wave of relief so potent it threatened to drown her. The dirt, the rags, the shame for this moment, they melted away. She was home, and she was forgiven. In the shared, silent tears of father and daughter, beneath the indifferent gaze of the setting sun, their broken world began to mend. Mr. Bennet, a man typically characterized by his dry wit and detached amusement, was no longer a figure of composure. He stood on the gravel path, his tweed coat slightly askew, his usually keen eyes blurred with tears, and his arms were a cradle. And in those arms, finally, was his daughter, Lydia. She was a wreck. Her usually vibrant hair was matted and tangled, clinging to a face streaked with dirt and the indelible marks of hardship. Her gown, once a testament to youthful exuberance, was torn and stained, clinging to her thin frame like a shroud. She smelled faintly of dust and desperation, a scent that pricked at his heart with every breath he took. For weeks she had been a phantom, a scandal, a gaping wound in the fabric of their family. The whispers had turned to shouts, the shame a tangible weight. He had railed against her recklessness, her folly, the sheer idiocy that had driven her away. He had felt fury, then a gnawing despair, and finally a hollow ache of absolute loss. He had truly believed her gone, irretrievably lost to the world and to him. But here she was, small and trembling, her breath hitching in ragged sobs against his chest, clinging to him as if he were her only anchor in a turbulent sea. And as his arms tightened around her, a dam broke within Mr. Bennet. The controlled exterior crumbled. A choked sob, raw and guttural, escaped his lips. Then another. They weren't the elegant sighs of a man inconvenienced, but the desperate, wrenching sounds of a soul reunited with something irrevocably precious. "Lydia," he whispered, his voice thick and broken. "My Lydia." He buried his face in her hair, the familiar scent of sunshine and youth now mingled with something darker, something that spoke of bitter trials. But it was her scent. It was her. "You're back," he sobbed, the words tumbling out in a cascade of grief and relief. "You're back, my child, my dear, foolish, lost child." He held her tighter, as if to physically press the reality of her return into his very bones. The anger, the disappointment, the agonizing weeks of uncertainty, they all receded before the overwhelming tide of her presence. I truly thought you were gone," he choked out, his voice cracking. "Lost to us. To me." Each word was a testament to the depth of his despair and the corresponding dizzying height of his joy. He had mourned her, a silent, private funeral for the daughter he knew. But this return, this tangible, breathing Lydia in his arms, was a resurrection. "My love," he murmured, the endearment surprising even himself with its fervor. He hadn't used it so openly in years, not since she was a little girl who clung to his leg, her laughter ringing clear. "My dearest love, you've come back." He felt the tremble of her body against his, the dampness of her tears on his coat. And in that moment, holding his runaway daughter, the one he had believed forever lost, Mr. Bennet could do nothing but sob. He sobbed for the fear, for the shame, but most of all he sobbed for the miracle of her return, for his dear, precious daughter, his love, had finally, blessedly come back to him. The long shadows of the late afternoon seemed to lengthen, but for Mr. Bennet, bathed in the fragile light of his daughter's return, the world had, at last, begun to brighten. Chapter 9. The day Lydia returned to Longbourn was, against all earlier predictions, and the very nature of her scandalous elopement, a day bathed in an unexpected, profound joy. It was not the boisterous, superficial joy Mrs. Bennet had once dreamt of for her daughter's advantageous matches, but a quiet, trembling relief that settled over the household like a gentle rain after a long drought. The shame remained, a faint shadow under the surface, but it was dwarfed by the sheer, overwhelming gratitude for her physical presence, her safety, her very, albeit unchastened, voice echoing through the familiar halls once more. The air had crackled with the nervous energy of greeting, the flurry of Mrs. Bennet's exclamations, half scolding, half weeping with relief. Jane offered soft, comforting words. Elizabeth watched with a complex mix of emotions, and even Mary paused her piano to observe the fragile domestic peace reassembling itself. That evening, after a dinner that was perhaps a little too silent at first, then punctuated by Lydia's oblivious chatter and Mrs. Bennet's sighs, the family gathered in the drawing room. A fire crackled softly in the hearth, casting dancing shadows upon the family portraits. Jane was embroidering. Elizabeth had a book open, but was not reading. Catherine was huddled close to Lydia, and Mary sat erect, poised as if ready to impart some profound, unasked-for wisdom. Mr. Bennet, instead of retreating to his library as was his custom, remained in his armchair by the fire, a rare expression of deep contemplation etched upon his features. He had been unusually quiet all day, his customary dry wit seemingly forgotten. The silence stretched, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the occasional rustle of fabric. Finally, he cleared his throat, a sound that drew all eyes to him. "My dears," he began, his voice surprisingly soft, lacking its usual sarcastic edge, "I find I have learned something valuable today." Mrs. Bennet, ever one to anticipate a lecture or a jest, bristled slightly. "Indeed, Mr. Bennet. And what profound lesson has Lydia's deplorable conduct taught you now, pray tell?" He looked at his wife, then at each of his daughters. his gaze lingering on Lydia, who was momentarily distracted from admiring her new bonnet. "It is not a lesson I anticipated, nor one I would have sought under such painful circumstances," he corrected, his tone earnest. "But it is valuable, nonetheless." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "For many years, I confess, I have viewed the follies of the world, and indeed the follies within this very house, with a certain detachment, an amused, if perhaps negligent, observer." Elizabeth's eyes widened slightly. This was unlike her father. "When Lydia departed," he continued, choosing his words carefully, "I felt the sting of disgrace, the fear for her safety, and yes, the anger at her thoughtlessness. But beneath it all, something else began to build. A profound aching void, a constant thrum of anxiety, and dare I say it, a longing for her return that surprised even myself." He leaned forward, gesturing slightly with one hand. "When I finally experienced that she was found, safe and returned, the relief was immense. And when she walked through that door today, I felt a joy that transcended every concern, every lingering shame. It was simply the joy of having her home again." He looked around the room, his gaze settling on Elizabeth, who met it with an understanding that required no words. "I had a passage come to mind today, from the Holy Scripture, a parable, Luke chapter 15, verse 24, I believe. It speaks of a father whose son was lost, but then was found. And the father declares, 'For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' And they began to make merry." A hush had fallen over the room. Even Lydia seemed to sense the gravity of the moment, her usual flippancy subdued. "I confess, I am not a man given to overt religious sentiment, nor to grand pronouncements of faith," Mr. Bennet said, a touch of his old self-deprecation returning, but softened by sincerity. "But in these past weeks, and especially today, I believe I have experienced, in a small, human portion, a glimpse of the very thing that parable describes. The profound longing and enduring love of the Heavenly Father for His lost children." His voice grew softer, tinged with a raw vulnerability. "To feel that desperate hope, that agonizing uncertainty, and then the overwhelming, unburdened joy of a child's return, one begins to comprehend the immensity of such a love that rejoices not in merit, but simply in presence, a love that truly believes a lost child is alive again." Mrs. Bennet, for once, was speechless, her handkerchief held limp in her hand. Jane's eyes were brimming with tears, and Elizabeth felt a lump form in her throat. She had never heard her father speak with such depth, such unvarnished emotion. He, the cynic, the observer, had been touched by something truly profound. "It is a great joy indeed," he concluded, looking at his youngest daughter, who, though still oblivious to the full meaning of his words, was undeniably present, undeniably home. "A great joy to have a lost child returned." The fire crackled, and in the quiet of the drawing room, a different kind of warmth filled the space. A fragile but undeniable joy, born of fear, relief, and a father's unexpected, transformative love.